had a nurse that came up and said, well, what if you had a family that had been doing fine and then all of a sudden they became difficult? And that got me all excited because I love to address that kind of thing. And I said, well, I'm curious about that word difficult. Like, what does that mean to you? And what
Mhm.
does that mean about that family? And how might you labeling them that way have impacted your interaction with them? And so I told her I would be curious, what has been your interaction with that family all along that now you perceive them as difficult? What are they not now doing that you wanted them to do? And so, we kind of got into it and she kind of thought about it and was like, that's really good because maybe what has changed. Get curious. Okay, you feel like they're more
Right.
difficult, have a conversation.
Welcome to NICU Heroes, a podcast produced exclusively for NICU professionals, with me, Kathryn Whitaker, as your host. I'm the mom of 6 children, including my very own NICU baby. This podcast is produced by Hand to Hold, a national nonprofit dedicated to providing free personalized support, resources, and community before, during, and after a baby's NICU stay. As a NICU professional, you've been well trained to care for the tiniest and the sickest babies every day. While a NICU parent's scars are not as visible, those parents are often as fragile as their babies, requiring patience, guidance, and encouragement to ensure that they are mentally, emotionally, and physically prepared to endure the pressure of a NICU stay. NICU Heroes is dedicated to helping NICU professionals, like you, better understand, support, and nurture the entire NICU family. Howdy, y'all, and welcome back to another really great episode of NICU Heroes. So, because it's April, I wanted us to focus on a couple of things. One, it's Black Maternal Health Awareness Month. And so, my guest today is a woman of color. She is an amazing doctor. She's also a NICU mom. And I think that Dr. Daigle's experience, both in the NICU as a physician, but also outside of the NICU, and instead being there as a mom, provides such rich experience, lived experience that I know will help you as you learn to serve your patients better. I think what I was most drawn to about Dr. Daigle, I originally had her over on our parent facing podcast, NICU Babies Parent Support. And the conversation was so rich and so real that I thought she would be an excellent guest here on NICU Heroes. And the interview that you're about to listen to does not disappoint. I think what I want you to hear in this particular interview is that there are ways that you can be more curious and a better NICU professional by getting to know your patients and where they're coming from. And that in turn will help you obviously serve their babies even better. But it's this curiosity that I'm most concerned about. So my guest today is Dr. Jessica Daigle, or Dr. Jess. She's a board certified pediatrician, a neonatal pediatric hospitalist, and the founder and CEO of Mom and Me MD. She's the proud mother of 2 kids, both born prematurely, with one staying in the NICU for 5 weeks. She's had a concierge medical practice in Atlanta, and it provides in-home and virtual care services to NICU babies and their families, with a focus on education and support to make the transition home from the NICU easier and less overwhelming. Can I get an amen? It's a lot. She also offers life coaching for NICU moms to help them balance their life after the NICU and to be the confident mom that they want to be. She's been featured on lots of podcasts and is the co-author with 46 other women physicians in Made for More, physician entrepreneurs practicing medicine and living life on their own terms. Dr. Daigle is passionate about patient care and experience, and she advocates for the NICU and postpartum mothers and their families. She believes moms and babies should thrive, not just survive, on their postpartum NICU journey and beyond. She lives in South Atlanta with her husband and her 2 children, and this is a fantastic conversation. I can't wait for you to hear it, so let's get to it. I am so excited to have Dr. Daigle back. She was with me over on the parent support, or on the NICU Babies Parent Support podcast, which is our parent-focused one. But because I loved our conversation so much over there, in fact, whenever we were recording that, I looked down and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how long we've been talking. I was like, well, then I have to have you on NICU Heroes because we have more time to chat. So thanks for being
Yay.
here.
Thank you. I always love talking about anything related to NICU families and support. It's my favorite thing to talk about.
Well, I'm going to brag on you before I ask the first question. I'm going to brag on you because we originally had this scheduled on a different day, and you reached out and you were like, Kathryn, I need to reschedule. I'm just not my best self today. And I think that if there's any way to talk about how to better care for patients and their families, that's a good example of like you have to be true to what you're feeling and then you have to share that with other people so that then they can help you. And you ended up helping me. You probably didn't know that, but I felt like it was so appropriate. I couldn't have planned it better. So it was a good example of like this is why you're the perfect guest for today. So
Oh,
we'll
well,
start with
thank you.
that.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Thank you so much.
Well, maybe give people an idea. I think it's always good, particularly on this podcast, when we give people like, what are your receipts? So maybe share why medicine. First of all, why did you choose to go into medicine
Okay.
and why specifically neonatology?
Okay. So actually, from young, I always knew that I wanted to work with kids in some capacity. Actually, I first thought that I was going to do like child psychology. I used to watch PBS. Many people know what that is. Where Mr. Rogers used to come on and all the Reading Rainbow and all those kind of shows. And they had like a little segment where they would do things where they were watching toddlers interact with each other and environment and different toys. And I remember just being very fascinated about like how they were learning and how they understood things. And so I thought that I would get into it that way. And then I came across this book back when people actually went to the library. I would so then I wanted to learn a lot about kids and babies. So I would just rent books. I would go to the library and browse books in like the child area. And I came across this book called The Long Dying of Baby Andrew. And I actually still have that book. I went ahead and bought it. And it was about this family that had this premature baby. This was back in the 70s. It was the Stinson family. And this was around the time that surfactant was coming out. So families of NICU and even NICU professionals are very familiar with surfactant, which for anybody else who may not be in the medical world, it helps the lungs of premature babies and actually all of us to breathe easier. But premature babies don't make enough of it at first, depending on their gestational age. And so they were developing a synthetic version of that so that way preemie babies could live longer and have more support with their respiratory system. And so this was around the time that was coming out, and the family was kind of fighting against like this heroic medicine is what they were calling it. And understandably at that time, it probably was very scary, just like now.
Sure.
Like anything new, you're like, what is this going to do to my baby? Or, what's going to happen? And so I was really intrigued by the ethics of that whole situation. I ended up even taking medical ethics a little bit further in my training. But that is what made me interested in neonatology. And so I went and did research. And there's a website and still up today called Neonatology on the Web. And it actually breaks down what is neonatology, how do you like from like primary school all the way through fellowship, like what you have to do. And it gave the history of neonatology. And so I was like, I told my mom, hey, I'm going to do this. Like, this is what I want to do. And I was about 10 years old at that time. And one of my friends, his mom was a neonatologist at that time. And so at the hospital where I was born, she worked in the NICU there, and she invited me to come and round with her. And I saw
Oh,
my first
wow.
baby in the isolette. And I was like, this is wow. Like a baby this little can live, like it probably was like a 28-weeker or something like that. But I remember just being so fascinated. And I remember being so defensive too, whenever people would be like, oh, you want to work with those little aliens? I would get so mad. And I wasn't even like a mom yet, but I thought that was just so disrespectful to refer to
Yeah.
them in ways. I'm like, no, these are like God's like little creatures. And it's amazing that at what was possible, like even then compared to now, like this was like for me 30 years ago. And so
Wow.
I just set myself on that path, and everything that happened along my life reaffirmed that that was what I was meant to do, up until even having my own child in the NICU. And I was like, this is just meant to be. And I couldn't have planned it better. So I'm like, thank you, God.
Well, I think all good things start with Lamar Burton. I watched PBS as a kid, and so many of the good books that I found were on Reading Rainbow. And when my kids were little, I used to do the same thing. I used to plant them in front of the TV and be like, you can watch PBS and you can watch
Yep.
Lamar Burton, and then we're going to go to the library and check out books because there's so
Yep.
much good knowledge there.
Yeah.
I, I think what I'm struck about that one is the early initiation of the vocation of knowing, like, this is what I want to do with my life.
Yeah.
But how do you think, Dr. Daigle, that sort of early introduction into the NICU sort of poised you to be a good neonatologist? Do you think, I'm just curious, like, because sometimes people discover babies or they discover this specialty with working with babies when they're in medical school and they start rounding, but you had the benefit of rounding when you were 10. So I'm
Yeah.
curious how you think that may have helped you as you started serving as a neonatologist.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm not a neonatologist. I'm a NICU pediatrician. So
Right, right,
I
right.
did the first year of a fellowship, but I just like to always like be clear on that. But to answer your question, I think for me, it enhanced my awareness early on of the importance of the work. It
Right.
intrigued me enough to where I kept reading and learning about it. And even to the point when I was in medical school, and sometimes you're not sure, am I going to get accepted? I still had my plan B was I was going to get an MPH in maternal infant health. So I was always still dedicated to improving that work and being involved in that work in some capacity. And I think that in itself just was part of my drive to learn more, to understand more. And then having my own experience just added that extra layer of the social piece. So I was always very engaged in the medicine of it. I always just thought it was a miracle and it was fascinating. And I've always approached being a doctor as a privilege. And I think that that's where sometimes people get lost. They get egocentric about it instead of realizing like it's a gift to be able to be in part of someone's life in what would be the most vulnerable, like your health and your wealth. I say your money and your health.
Hmm.
Those are the two areas that that's kind of close to you, right? Like
Yeah.
and impact your life like all around, right? Like if you can't even physically do anything, what does it matter about your money? And then money helps you live well, right? So those two things together are always important. And so just really understanding the importance of the work early on and always being dedicated to the patient, I think helped me. And it's funny because people will say, well, I do pediatrics. I can't do pediatrics because I can't deal with parents. Like that's what a lot of my colleagues say. And it can be challenging, but I always
Yeah.
took the alternative approach to say, well, what is the other perspective? This is someone who is afraid. They're also in a vulnerable state of
Right.
their child who can't often speak sometimes, especially in the NICU, right? They can't, with words at least, say, hey, this is bothering me. You have to take a lot of context clues. Like when you have a car, you have to take to the mechanic, like
Right.
you got to get a little bit creative with your diagnosis. And so I just always took that perspective of understanding like they're just trying their best too. And if we take this more team approach, things that tend to go better. And so understanding that it's a privilege and always operating with that mindset, I think has been the most important impact for me.
So before we talk, because I know you mentioned that you had a couple of NICU stays. So before we talk about that, maybe give people an idea of like what does your day-to-day life look like in your role at
Mhm.
the hospital?
Okay. So right now I work as a locum. So that means I travel and work at a couple of different hospitals. So I have my license in 12 states. So I've been staying more local because of my own two kids and trying to make sure I'm involved in all their activities with soccer and dance and all the things. And so for me, I work right now in a level 2 NICU, which is a NICU that can take 32 weeks and up and older. And I also do general P. So I still admit kids to the pediatric floor for things like bronchiolitis or pneumonia or sickle cell. So I like it because it keeps me still with my general pediatric knowledge too. But my favorite part is going to the deliveries and seeing the babies being born. So typically, I arrive at the hospital like 7 a.m. and I get sign out from the other doctor who would be on at night because we're doing shift work. Sometimes I do 24 hours, but sometimes I do 12 hours. So it just depends on the needs of the hospital. And so after that, when you run the list, you know who the patients are, the babies are, and then you kind of triage yourself like what's important. So I'm always keeping my ear to the ground in labor and delivery because sometimes the communication there could be hit or miss. Sometimes they're quick
Yeah.
to tell you what's going on. And sometimes you're like, oh, I'm glad I was eavesdropping so I could hear about this, 24 weeker that just rolled in, they're trying to sit and see what she's doing. And so I really check in with them and just say, what's up? I read their board, see who's in labor. And then I round on discharges. So, we're trying to get people out, people that are ready to go home. So I run the list in the computer, do all the checks and balances, make sure screens are done, that the baby's otherwise clinically well appearing to go home. And then I will go and see the NICU babies first. And a lot of times, if it depends on if someone comes to me and something is a little bit more urgent, obviously you have to reroute your day. But
Right.
typically, you tend to look at like the NICU babies, then the discharges, and then in between that, going to any deliveries that may be emergent or scheduled C-sections and things like that. I have to go to the C-sections and any delivery that's like where they're worried about the mom. All some of the vaginals, I mean, I necessarily have to go to it. And I actually am fortunate to work with two or three nurse practitioners, depending on how many are on. So sometimes they'll go to some of the vaginal deliveries to allow me to do like the discharges and stuff like that. So it really depends on like what's actually on the list and then triaging so that discharges are out, but the babies are getting the most immediate care that need the most immediate attention.
Right. I mean, so
And sometimes the ER is calling in between that saying,
oh,
"Hey, can you come look at this kid?"
sometimes it's a party. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
the least fun party you've ever been to. So, I mean, so you were locked in as a doctor, you know what you're doing, and then you find yourself in the NICU. What was it like to be on the other side, knowing what you like? Did you know too much? Like, I'm
Yeah,
curious what it was like to be on the other side. And then in a second, we're going to talk about the post of that. So, what was it
yeah.
like to be on the other side, Dr. Daigle?
So my other side started like before I even had my NICU baby with my first pregnancy, where I ended up having a miscarriage. And I had found myself like about 18 weeks or so with some early symptoms, like some early cramping. And my OB had told me that my cervix was funneling. So if people think of like a funnel, like what you put oil in your car, how it's wide at the top and narrow, that's what my cervix was doing, was kind of widening. So not really necessarily opening down at the bottom. And so then it was like, well, cerclage may or may not be helpful in that case, kind of a thing. So we were just going to kind of wait and see. So she had put me on bed rest. And then I was like, well, what does this mean being on bed rest? Like, does that mean I really don't do anything or I'm just not rounding on the hospital as much? So, I had taken leave because I was a resident at the time. And I don't even know how far from that time out that I ended up having it, but I remember going to get something to eat. We went to like the Rock and Roll Cafe or some kind of place like that here in Atlanta. And I remember, we got something to eat and then walking home, I remember like the intensity got more increased. And so when we got home, I was sitting at the table and all of a sudden I felt a gush of fluid. And I was like, oh my goodness, am I peeing on myself? Like, that's what I was thinking. And then I went to the bathroom and then I was looking and I was like, well, I know anatomy and that is not coming from there. So I called my OB and I was like, yeah, so my water working. She was like, okay, come to the hospital. And so I went to the hospital and, they did all the things. And she was like, yeah, we're not going to be able to do anything because I was like 19 and probably 19 and 4 or 5 days. I can't remember the exact days, but I was between the 19th and 20-week mark. And I just remember just feeling so devastated, like, man, being like, oh, this is like what I've seen other people go through, walking the halls and the flowers on the door for a fetal loss or a demise. And actually that whole experience, like they ended up giving me the medicine to go ahead and induce the labor. And I ended up delivering my son by myself. It was just me and my son in there because
Oh, God.
I could feel it. Yeah, I could feel it. And we were calling out and the people didn't get in there in time. So I had to do it. And it was so rough. It was so rough, not just for me, but for my husband, because, I had to take on the role of explaining to him, like, why we couldn't do anything. And I ended up having a conversation with my OB about that later because I told her that that was a place that I had needed her to show up more for me. And he was actually mad when I went back with her when I got pregnant again. But I was like, well, she's a good doctor. She's a really good doctor. It's just that that was a learning opportunity for her. And I like to say that sometimes it's not just, you got to be able to isolate an incident from a person, and I took that as a teachable moment for her and for myself, about advocating as well, like speaking up. And so I went through that. And one of the things I learned from that experience was like there are so many people that go through it that you just don't know because people don't talk about it. That's like one of the most silent things. And so it gave me a new appreciation for whenever I would log in and say I would have a new mom come in and you see like G2P0. I think about that means something. Like that's not just numbers. That meant that there was a pregnancy there that didn't carry through. And it got me curious about that person. And so then whenever that family would be so joyous at that current pregnancy going through, admit something more, right? Because I
why?
know that there was a background there. And so I just enhanced my appreciation for people's stories, like for mom's stories and families. It gave me an appreciation for what my husband was dealing with, as a man, and this even having the conversation with him about what did that feel like to him going through that? What did that mean for him? How did he feel? And he even had his own guilt. Like, was it something that I did or I did?
Right.
You're trying to rationalize it. Should I just have said no when we wanted to go get something to eat? Just all the things that you think of to try to make it make sense, right? And so then when I got pregnant again, I was considered high risk already. So I was seeing the maternal fetal medicine doctor, which for listeners is a OB that's more specialized in seeing moms prenatally who may have medical conditions that can impact the pregnancy. And so they were following me more closely. And when we got around that 20-week mark, we started doing a little bit of the same thing. And I was remember just being like, oh God, like, no, I can't go through that
Please
again,
don't do this again. Yeah.
Yeah. But then when on that prenatal ultrasound, my son was flexing like this. And I've shown that picture on my Instagram. And I remember my husband was like, he's letting us know he's going to make it. Like he's strong enough. And so then when I looked up names that mean strong and willful, and that's how we came up with Liam, because it means willful and strong. And so then we started seeing that same cervical funneling again, we talked about it. I was like, no, I don't want to get a cerclage or anything because I was nervous about that may get me go into labor too, because
Right.
that's also a complication of that. And then I
See,
was like,
this
well, I'll
is
just
where the no too much, right? You know
yes,
too
that
much.
is. Yeah, that is where that does come in. And so, but it also helped me, I think, to be able to have a more informed conversation with my OB.
Right.
And so she was like, well, I'm gonna put you in a hospital this time. And I thought that might be the best. So I was in the hospital for 9 weeks, like 65 after having Liam days in the hospital. And so then I got steroids at 24 weeks because I went in about 22 weeks and maybe 4 days, 3 or 4 days, something like that. And I got steroids at 24 weeks, and then I got them again at 28 weeks. And then she was like, all right, if we've gotten to a good place. And I remember my water breaking like at 29 weeks, and I was like, oh. But then she put me on antibiotics, and we stayed. I didn't labor though, so she put my antibiotics to cover me for infection. And my husband was doing research about how amniotic fluid was made, and he was like, oh, maybe you'll fill back up. And
These men, they're so funny. Oh my
and
gosh.
well, we made it another 2 weeks after that, and then he came at 31 weeks. So it was interesting. And so to answer your question, it was a long backstory to your question, but really the being on the other side really was more the emotional impact, I think, is
Yes.
what surprised me. And I think that that's true for probably any new parent, like just coming to that realization of somebody meaning so much to you just like within an instant. Like it's amazing. I don't think it's anything that you can explain to anyone until
Right.
and as much as I loved kids, obviously I became a pediatrician before I even had my own kids. It still was so different, like that amount of love that you can have for a person and like the appreciation of the miracle that's in front of your face. And I still get excited about that when I see other people have babies. Like it's still amazing to me every time. But really that, like, I remember the first time I had to leave to go with my husband somewhere, and I was like bawling my eyes out. And I was like, no, he's gonna know I didn't visit the NICU. And he's like, he's not gonna know you wasn't there for 2 days. I was like, you don't know what he won't know.
But it is, I mean, I love that you first, I did not know that backstory. So Dr. Daigle,
Yeah.
thank you for so vulnerably
Oh
sharing that.
yeah, no problem.
I had to take a minute to get it together. Okay.
Yeah, and sometimes I share that story and I don't cry, and sometimes I do. I
I
just never
know.
know when it's gonna hit me either.
Sure. Well, I think I love the way you frame that. This was an incident that you hope never happens, but for you to be able to go back to that doctor again and have another pregnancy, I mean, I think teaches us a couple of things. One is that um, we all have the opportunity to grow and learn, but two, I don't know how you were able to do that, to step outside of yourself and say this really hard thing that I'm going through, but also, man, this is going to help this person learn to serve another patient better and in a different way. And I mean, and I think I see that, and we'll talk about what you do in your concierge practice in a minute. But I mean, this ability to say like, hey, we're going to take this really hard, difficult, horrible thing, and we're going to find a way to redeem it because we're going to do better the next time. knowing that those circumstances happen to people all the time. So this like emotional roller coaster that people are on, and just
Yeah.
being aware of things.
Yeah.
So when you were, and you and I visited about this on the parent podcast, but I think it's worth mentioning here is that there's sometimes things that happen that seem certainly innocuous in a NICU setting, like you had a really cute outfit on your baby because you wanted to take pictures, and then you come back and the outfit's been taken off,
Yeah.
and because the baby had an accident, and the nurse just sort of sets it aside. And you and I
Yeah.
were talking about how hard that is, because when you don't have a baby that can fit into real clothes and you finally find something that fits and you're about to take photos, and then something happens to it and they don't even think to tell you, like, hey, it was stained or whatever, like it's
Yeah.
just this it's this disconnect of like the emotional bandwidth of people. So
Yeah.
maybe let's talk about that. This
Yeah.
awareness of like, read the room of what maybe someone's going through, step outside of like the medical part, and let's
Yeah.
look at the emotional well-being, not of the baby, but of the
Yeah.
caregiver that's serving that baby.
Yes, I think that's so important. And I think that being in my experience has helped me to see that. And it's even what I talked about last year at the National Association of Neonatal Nurses conference about cultivating that compassion and having that awareness and realizing that we do this every day. We show up to the hospital, we clock in, just like how I describe my day. It's road for me. I know what I'm going to do most likely when I show up. And I even have contingency plans for if a baby comes early. Like I know what I'm going to be doing, but this family, that's their first, most many times their first
Right.
experience and their first baby. Like they're getting the powwow double over. They're becoming a
Right.
new parent with a sick baby. Like that's just like not ideal, right? Like it's just not what you would want to put on someone. You know, it's hard. And so I challenge the nurses even then, like when you go to clock in, think about what it really is that we're doing outside of just the routine, but why does it matter? And what, just consider the family before you just take a second look at people and say, this is a person before me. These are people that have feelings and emotions and experiences and education and culture and they're wrapped up into all of the complexities of what makes us who we are. And if we isolate and only compartmentalize everything all the time, and there is a room for it, like right when I'm going in to
Sure.
do the delivery, I can't worry about the fact that the mom on this laying on these C-section bed and I'm giving the baby PPV, but I'm aware of it. I'm going to acknowledge it. Like I'm going to do what can to establish a baby, but then I step right over and then say, "Hey, you might have noticed that I had to give your baby breast. This is why." I do acknowledge it because they're thinking it and they're wondering what happened and
Right.
why I had to do that. And we need to do more of that. We need to intertwine all of that. It's important because it has impact. Like nothing ever in our life is isolated. And I think that's what people forget. Everything has a domino effect. Like just what we were talking about, like me just even telling you, hey, I'm tired. Like me not sharing that with you could have like made you feel stressed in some of the things you had to do. Cause sometimes we're just so worried about other like ourselves or like imposing on people instead of being authentic about like, hey,
Sure.
I'm struggling right now. Like I need a day. And somebody else be like, I was struggling too. Thank you for saying that. Cause and people need more of that authenticity where we're so busy trying to like have these walls and show up to what we're perceived as that this is what it means to look professional or be a professional. No, being a professional means being skilled at what you do, but it doesn't remove your humanism and it doesn't
Yeah.
remove the ability to be aware and say, hey, I need to acknowledge that and validate this experience for these families. And I've studied myself. I believe real big in self-reflection. Like when you go home, think about your day and think about the conversations you've had or the disagreements you've had. Like what made that way and what could have been better. That's the only way you can get better. If you just kind of just
Right.
carrying on through life like doop doo doo, I don't care, it doesn't matter. Like it does matter. Like stop saying that. Everything matters.
When you go back to the NICU, Dr. Daigle, were there a series of things, or were there some things that a NICU nurse did or one of the other therapists in the hospital did that sort of made you feel seen, that you were like, "Oh, I need to remember that because that is gonna help me be better." Can you think of a time that maybe they did something that you're like, "Man, that made a," and maybe it took a few, maybe it took a little while to look back when you're talking about your reflections, that you reflect back and be like, "Oh, that actually was a beautiful thing that they did, and I wish that I would have acknowledged it even more."
Yeah. I think for me, really the like family centered rounds, and then making sure that the rounds, because they knew me at the facility
Sure.
because I rotated there, but my husband was not in medicine. So being very cognizant of explaining to him at a level that he understood what was going on, making sure he was involved in those rounds, which is something I realized a lot of the dads and sometimes partners feel unseen because a
Right.
lot of times people do tend to talk directly to the mom. So I make sure to involve the dad because of that experience. And I bring them a seat and, I'll tease them. I'll be like, we're not going to treat you like a stepchild. We're going to give you a chair too.
I love that. I
And
love
I
that.
even encourage them to do skin to skin. And I say, I don't let us know if the mom is hogging the baby. They laugh. We bring some laughter to it, but also to acknowledge them. And the moms love that too because they like that we have included their partner too. And
Right.
especially because sometimes they're the ones that get to see the baby first. Because if they're still
Right.
on the C-section table, or especially if they've had to undergo general anesthesia, I try to be mindful. Like I have a lot of jobs in the hospital other than being a doctor. I also the photographer. So I take lots of pictures. I'd be like, Dad, do you have your phone? Because I just don't want you to have to sleep on the couch tonight because you don't have pictures of this baby with this weight. So
But
I was
those
in the
things matter.
yeah, they do. Like I take pictures. I take pictures of the family. They tease me in the OR. I have an assistant anesthesia to join me now. I'm like, we might have a business here.
Well, but oftentimes it's the NICU
Ah,
nurse that says, "Do you want me to take a photo?" And sometimes I'll be like, "No, no, 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 we're not." And they would insist. And I remember one time one of them said, "Let me take it and you can delete it later."
that's true.
And when I looked at it later, I said, "Thank God we took that photo."
Yeah,
I have
yeah,
deleted none of those
yeah.
photos
Me either.
because at the time I was like, "Oh, I don't want to take them," but they
Yeah.
knew better than I did. So I was so grateful for that.
Yeah, and I often do that even with like things like breastfeeding. Like sometimes they'll be like, I hadn't thought about it. And I'm like, hey, just try. I always say, I'm not here to pressure you. But I'd rather you make an informed decision because sometimes
Right.
we're just scared of something. Like the first time I had sushi, I was like, oh, no, I'm good. Now I eat sushi all the time, right? But I could have been missed out on some good stuff just because I was like just unsure, right? Not to equate sushi to breastfeeding, but you get my
Right.
drift. So
Both
but I want,
delicious, I guess.
yes, both delicious. But I've had moms even come back and say, oh, thank you for like kind of that gentle nudge with breastfeeding because a lot of it was driven by fear or they just didn't
Right.
know what to expect. And so sometimes when we're afraid, we just stop. Like that's just in anything, right? And sometimes we push forward. So it's just kind of helping them have that little bit of courage to say, hey, at least you can say, I tried and I really didn't like it versus wondering later, like,
Right.
I wonder if I would have liked it if I had given it a
Right.
shot. So I think if we just, again, that's why I preach awareness. I'm going to give my TED talk on this one day. Awareness, curiosity, and
Yeah.
humanism is my trifecta. It's how I approach every patient that I see. I walk in the room. I'm like, I acknowledge this person. I'm curious about them. Who is this person? Why are they here? What made them show up here? What do they need from me? What do they need from us? I think if we start to ask more questions, we can do better at answering them.
I do love that word curiosity because it takes away maybe some of our implicit bias, maybe some of our privilege, like all the things. Like if we could just learn to be curious about a specific situation. So I actually want to dive
Yes.
into that a little bit
Yes.
because I want to acknowledge when I was in the NICU, I had a husband who had a good job. So my privilege allowed me to be at the hospital often during the day. I was educated, so I knew who to ask to get the questions answered that I needed to get answered.
Hmm.
But I recognized that I was looking around that NICU and I knew that there were many people that did not have all those things. They either didn't have the time off of work, they didn't have the income, they didn't have the support. And so maybe let's talk about this curiosity piece of
Hmm.
when someone comes into the NICU, they come, you know, prematurity does not discriminate.
Nope.
It happens to anyone. And so let's talk about how we can serve populations better that may not have all those privileges and all those things that sort of make them quote unquote
Yeah.
the ideal patient. Like, how do we serve them better?
Yeah.
This podcast is produced by Hand to Hold, a national nonprofit, but we're more than simply a podcast. Hand to Hold is here to support your NICU in two ways. One, you can refer your NICU parents to us for support, or two, you can bring dedicated hand to hold support to your NICU, either in person or virtually. Our support consists of one-to-one, group, and educational resources, including our family-focused podcast, NICU Babies Parent Support. For more information, visit handtohold.org and click on NICU Professionals.
So I talked about that too for Hand to Hold in their mental health conference in 2023. And I talked about giving support in and out of the NICU. And I said that I really think every NICU needs to have a needs assessment done, like on every family. Like, who is this family? What's your circumstance? Like, where you live, like the demographics, like the stuff that we sometimes just are checking off. Oh, they live here and they are this age and they have this job and this kind of insurance. But what does that mean really, right? Like if we would have been taking assessment on you, that means that, hey, her husband can supply enough of them. She can be here, or that she has this transportation or not. Okay, well, this is Miss Johnson, and she has 2 other kids at home, actually, not just this NICU baby. And her job has not said that she could stay off longer than X, Y, and Z, so she has to go back, and she's trying to decide, like, does she take more time off now or save that time for when the baby comes home from the NICU, and then, okay, yes, she wants to be there every day, but she does the work. And then who's going to keep little John and little Aaron, while she's at the NICU, because her mom has said she's not keeping those kids every day and X, Y, and Z. Like, these are people's real situations.
Real lives.
And
People have
so,
real lives.
yeah, people have realized, and I say this all the time, like, I wish when you have a baby, whether in the NICU or not, you could compartmentalize your life and say, you know what, I'm taking a vacation from the real world, and I'm just going to get to go and live over here in this bubble and take care of my baby. Like, that people would love that, right? Like, you just don't have to worry about nothing else. Everything is magically going to be supplied, all your needs. But that's not reality. When you have a kid, NICU or not, your whole life is impacted. Everything, your home life, your career, or whether you stay at home, your finances, your relationships, your own mental health and well-being changes. And if we don't acknowledge that, then we can't help people with things we don't acknowledge. So the way that we do that is through curiosity. When I spoke about that at the NAN conference too, I had a nurse that came up and said, well, what if you had a family that had been doing fine, and then all of a sudden they became difficult? And that got me all excited, because I love to address that kind of thing. And I said, well, I'm curious about that word difficult. Like, what does that mean to you? And what does that mean about that family? And how might you labeling them that way have impacted your interaction with them? And so I told her I would be curious, what has been your interaction with that family all along that now you perceive them as difficult? What are they not now doing that you wanted them to do? And so, we kind of got into it, and she kind of thought about it and was like, that's really good, because maybe what has changed? Get curious. Okay, you feel like they're more difficult? Have a conversation. Hey, Johnson, I noticed that you seem a little bit more frustrated today. You want to tell me what's going on, or is there something I can help with? Versus, instead of taking it personal, being like, I don't know why they coming up in here with this attitude, because I'm just here trying to do my job. And, like, that's how the attitude people take it. It's like, that's not helping the solution. That's creating more distance, more gap. When sometimes people just needed somebody to acknowledge, like, just to even see that about them, like, hey, they paying attention. Did they notice that I'm a little different today? That means they care about who I am as a person and how I've been showing up in here previously. So I think that's why I'm always quick to ask a question. I always like to give the root of why someone is doing something, like, because everybody has a reason. Now, whether we agree with the reason, whether the reason makes sense to us, or whether that wouldn't be our reason for doing it, it still doesn't negate their reason.
But just because that's not your reaction, like, I think that's therein lies the challenge, is that we have a situation that happens and we know how we would react. And when someone reacts differently, sometimes we get frustrated when really we should be like, I wonder why.
Yeah,
There's a lot of reasons as to why. And again, like you said, you may not agree with them, but if you can understand them, that helps you build empathy.
Yeah, and then you can build a bridge. Like, okay, so then, and I've had, like, I have had some frustrating families, I tell you, and I've had to leave and go and be like, now, Lord, help me bridge this gap. And then I go back. I circle back around.
Help me bridge this gap.
No,
help
I'm
me not kill them
serious.
first. Yeah, help me bridge the gap. That's
like,
so
and I
good.
think I think people are just not honest. Like, I'm gonna be honest. You want them to be honest with their feelings. You have to be honest too. That is frustrating. And so I went back and talked with their mom and said, hey, I think you and I want the same things. I think we really want the same things. We're just coming at it a different way. So tell me why this suggestion concerns you. I got curious. Like, what are you worried about? And so, because I can't address what I don't understand. If she's worried, if I'm talking about this and that's not what she's worried about, then we our conversation will never connect, right? Like, I'll be talking about A and she worried about B, and we'll stay frustrated. And like just like communication is key to any good relationship, and that's even with your patients, your colleagues, your spouses, your kids. And so I think we just have not stressed that in training. Actually, like I say, it needs to go to like our primary school. I mean, and even if we can't go that far back, at least in medical school and nursing school, they need to really stress communication and trauma informed care. And then I think we'll see a whole lot of difference of trainees that come out, what their awareness level is and their curiosity level.
Yeah, because you've taken people who come in with their real lives that were already brewing at home. There could be difficult relationships, job loss, illness, whatever. And then now you've given them this extra trauma of a NICU baby. And so they're carrying a lot of baggage and they roll into the NICU. And then now it's a high stress, high anxiety environment in a place that probably feels very unknown.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to process that. So, as the NICU professionals focusing on the medical needs of the baby, there's also all this emotional stuff and maybe physical of the people who are caring for that baby. So, it almost
Yep.
feels like there's two big areas where you're trying to serve patients. And
Yeah.
one feels a little bit more straightforward, like I can look in a book or I can do a consultation and we can figure this out.
Yep.
And then now we have all this other stuff that's maybe not as easy to look up in a book and figure out. So it provides a lot of stress. So
Yes.
as you were sort of going through being a doctor, and then you looked around, and I know you started this great company called Mom and Me. So I think give people an idea of where that came from and what it is that you do for families and babies.
Yeah. So just really through Mom and Me, for me, the name actually, when I was thinking of starting a company that focuses on maternal infant health, like just outside of the hospital, but I didn't want it to be a traditional practice because I didn't like how the rush of having to see like 60 people in a day just to make it. That's why I never worked in the clinic. It worked out that I wanted to do natal medicine. So I was like, well, that's easy. I just have to be in the hospital. But even when I was a trainee, I was that person that took like 45 minutes with a person in clinic and they'd be knocking on the door like, you've been in there too long, but like, yeah, I got this 16-year-old that just found out she's pregnant. This is not about to be a 10-minute conversation, like, and I'm not gonna make it one.
Uh,
I bucked the system really early that way. And I'm still true to form to that today.
that's why I
And
like you.
so, oh, I like you too. But as a pediatrician, we're trained to like focus on, like this the kids, right? And obviously we do know the family unit is important in that, but it really is like you're treating the child. But it became even more apparent to me through the work and through my own experiences that including the mom, and I say mom and me plus a village equals three is my new thing, I'd say too. But really that dyad is important. Like if we don't see to the well-being of the mom and hence the family, then we really can't do our best for that child. It's again that compartmentalizing is not going to help. Like, oh, I'm just going to only do this for the kid. But yeah, but if you prescribe this for this child, but you're not sure that this mom understands what she's doing or has the
Right.
means to get to the drugstore to get this antibiotic, then the child is still impacted, right? And so that's
Right.
how the Mom and Me came about. Like the child is saying, hey, got to make sure my family's good too. And then initially when I started, it was meant to be an answer to like the fourth trimester. Like I wasn't really being as true to myself with that too, because my passion was with NICU families. And I was like, how can I make this work for a NICU family? And so now I've transitioned to NICU grads, follow up and support, family support, because to me too, understanding that that's where a lot of the struggle for families comes, like once they leave the NICU. Obviously the whole journey is challenging for different reasons. When you're in the
Right.
NICU, it's a new world, it's a new language, a new culture. You're worried if your baby's even just going to make it. And then when you get home, you like think, you like exhale, but then you're afraid. You're like, wait, I don't have all those people anymore that was making my baby stay alive. Like that's the way you think, right? And then like, or now my baby still has these health challenges that I still have to manage and care for. And now I don't have a doctor at my disposal every day or a nurse every day. And so a lot of that time is anxious too. And so I wanted to be a solution to that with extending that education and that support. And I've had a couple of families that signed up that made the idea like worth it. Before I even said it was going to be like NICU families, that's the people that was attracted to working with me. And I was like, maybe there is something to this. And it was one of the families, they really required more support while the baby was in the NICU. And they didn't really necessarily feel it's like they needed as much when they came home. It was like some 34-week twins. And I remember being so offended. And my husband was like, "You're the only person I know that's offended with not having to work so much." He was like, "You want them to call you like 24 hours of the day, don't you?"
You cared about them, though. You
Yeah,
cared about them.
I did. And we would check in and everything like that. But I was just thinking, okay, am I really serving them then? That was like my question, right? And he was like, "Well, you're serving them if you're there for whatever they need." And so then I looked at it
Right.
differently. Then my next family was the one that gave me the idea of it
Yeah.
was like we met and we addressed things and I helped them with things around like the early intervention, understanding what specialists they needed to see when their baby was having some issues with her airway. And so it was all of that. And so it was in addition to the pediatrician too, which was one of the things that was conflicting. I was like, well, will I be their only pediatrician? But then I would hate for them to feel like they got like dropped after a certain age because I already was clear I didn't want to do like 0 to 18, even as much as my husband was like, "Man, you would have all of South Georgia in your office if you had a practice."
Right. Well, and I think that was the challenge is like when you leave the NICU, you feel like, oh, the hard part is over. And it took about 48 hours of us being
Yep.
home that I was like, um, I'm sorry. Can we go back to the NICU? Because it was really overwhelming, really
Yes.
hard. Like the scheduling of the visits, the understanding of what was going on medically. And then I became hyper aware of any symptom and then I
Yep.
would like exacerbate it. And I was like, I think we need to go to the ER. My husband was like, I don't think that's an ER issue, and sometimes it was, but I mean, I
Yeah.
just there was a lot of unrest and there wasn't a lot of support post NICU, which made it really difficult. I felt like we had many of the things, or at least access to many of the things that we had and needed in the NICU. But then upon discharge, I mean, it felt like a big spot of grief for us because I was like, and now
Yeah.
what? I am
Yeah.
floating into the abyss and I have no idea what I'm doing. So to know that there are opportunities to sort of plug back into that support network is such a important piece. What do you think the biggest gap is, Dr. Daigle, between I guess the biggest gap that we have in caring for NICU families and then when they're discharged, like where do you think the disconnect is? How do you think that we can do that better?
I think in the NICU, we need to do a better job of it was when one of the NICUs that I used to work at, they had like a little roadmap to discharge. And I loved it because it kind of gave families touch points along the way of
Right.
milestones.
Right.
And so helping them from the beginning understand that this is going to be a journey, I think is key. And having touch points of reinforcement. Having a family understanding their baby's about to go home like 24 hours before they're about to go home is too late. It's too late to and I get it. I get it as a professional. You don't want to be too early because there's a lot. Sometimes if a baby's born at 24 weeks, there's a lot of things that can be happening medically that can extend a stay. But you could still give them an overview of this is what it would look like to go home. And even when I talk to a family, I say I can't give you a time frame, but I can tell you what I would like to see based on this. So being off oxygen, and I'll say, and some very few babies will still go home on oxygen, but you want it to be as minimal of support as necessary. Being able to eat enough to gain weight and grow, being able to maintain their own body temperature. So if they understand these, bam, 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 these are the tasks, then
Right.
they can follow along and see, are we meeting that task, whether it happened 2 weeks out or 2 to 3 months out. At least they know what we're waiting on to happen. And then we can have a discussion along the way about if we're not seeing it in a certain window, what might be different in this case? And I think that's how you have to approach it. And you validate that this is going to be a long journey or can be a long journey. And any point along this pathway, if we need to revisit why we're in a holding pattern, then I'm willing to do it. And I think that that's what you have to be willing to do, is that continual assurance and that prep along the way. That's why I actually have a live coming up with a mom who made your NICU notebook. We're going to talk about her journal she created where families can jot down along the way too. I think that's so important too, for us to be helping families to make note of the things. Hey, I want you to write down your baby came off oxygen today. I want you to make note of the fact that they're doing their first bottle feeding or breastfeeding session, like engaging with them in these milestones and helping the families to see that these are milestones too, that we appreciate and that they are huge, even if they seem tiny to them, right? Like everything in the NICU is huge, actually.
I know for
I
such
think,
small patients, everything is
yes,
really big.
it really is big. It's true. Like everything. I mean, I get excited when they just like open their eyes. I'm like, whoa, look at that. And so,
I've never heard such a roar of gratitude when our son blew out his diaper. So he had some stuff GI
see,
wise, and when he blew out his diaper, like it was practically a party, and I was like, I feel so seen.
but I want to put this out there because I don't think that too many of my colleagues really know the other side. Like, they don't really, most people don't really have the time to have these conversations, especially in some of the higher level NICUs, like the level 3s and 4s. So I kind of feel lucky that I work in level 2s where I can sit down and talk to a family. Like I pull up a chair and I sit and I will have a 20-minute conversation with them. And I like being able to do that. And I know it can be very challenging in some of the larger NICUs when you have 40 and 50 babies, but we have to do it, even if it's hiring a nurse navigator or designating a person, or the physicians take turns being like the physician, navigator for that month or something. But there can be ways. And I think if we start to ask ourselves, how can we improve the experience for families? We'll explore it versus saying, we can't do that. We can't do that. Well, how can we? Because there are people letting people hold their babies at 24 weeks, skin to skin, ventilated. And people used to be afraid of that, but it's happening. It's happening in some institutions. So those are the ones that ask, how can we allow these families to start doing kangaroo care where their baby's still intubated, right? Instead of saying, no, we can't do it because we don't want to lose the tube and we don't want to lose access. And that's important. But we have seen it's possible. And so we need to start entertaining more possibility, else we wouldn't have surfacted.
Right. Well, I mean, I absolutely love the idea of sharing with patients like what are the objectives, what are the goals. So if the goal is to, breathe room air, if the goal is to, be able to take feeds by mouth and gain weight, and then if you can't do that, then is it a G tube? Is it TPN? Like what are the steps? Well, I think that would have
Yes.
alleviated a tremendous amount of anxiety and allowed me to maybe not only love my baby better, but maybe to also to have more bandwidth to listen
Yeah.
to a specialist when they came in, either with a new diagnosis or something else that we were dealing with. Because on the rudimentary level, I was like, but my baby's not eating. And like it was really hard for me to get past that. So if I had known, okay, these are the three things that you have to do to basically blow this joint. So like these are the three things that we need from you. And then if your baby doesn't get like an A plus plus in that, like what's an A or what's a B minus? Like how can we sort of step that down? And so we still
Yes.
reach the goal,
Yes.
but it might look different. So I think
Yes.
I really love that. Okay. So we're adding
Hmm.
that to your list of things that you need to create. But I want to ask you this because while we talked about empathy and compassion, what do you think a good boundary is, Dr. Daigle, for a patient to put in place to get better care? And what do you think a good boundary for a NICU professional is to put in place to be a better NICU professional?
I think from the patient side is understanding that this is their baby. Like, I think that I've had so many moms say they feel like their baby belongs to the NICU team, and like they're just like the visitors. Even in the Family Center Care Task Force, we've talked about changing that language. Like, you're not the visitor. That this is your child that you're coming to see. And because language and labels matter. Like
They
even
do.
terms like that create a certain type of aura and environment in the way people look at you and how they respond to you. So I think understanding that this is your baby and you have a right to advocate and understand what is going on, what are you seeing, what you're not seeing, and you have a right to speak up.
How could they serve their patients better?
I think,
Um,
thank you.
let's do
Okay.
that. How can they
Yeah.
serve their patients
Okay.
better?
Because I'm like a boundary. I feel like we already are enforced so many boundaries already on the professional side in a way, and it's turned in, I think, into a way of where we don't serve them well because we're like, we look at ourselves as like, look, I'm here to take care of your baby and blah, blah, blah. But we're more than that.
Yes, you are.
We're the advocates of this baby. We're caretakers on the other side. I always say that we're actually the support staff. I say the baby's in charge. We're just the support staff
That's
because
so
we
true.
don't. I mean, look, we can't make them do anything before they want to. It doesn't matter. We just give them. Hey, we give you the CPAP, but it's when you breathe better that you come off. When we give you the feeding tube, but it's when you want to suck, swallow, and
That's
breathe
so
better that
why
you
are
come
we
off.
giving 25 weekers, the reins to the keys to the kingdom? But it's so true because
It's true.
they dictate when you do everything.
You do,
They're like
but
having an obstinate 2-year-old. You can't
yes,
make your
see.
2-year-old do anything unless they want
You
to.
got to validate them. Be like, Tommy, I understand why you don't want to eat those peas. I get it. Green was not my color back in the day either, but I'm telling you, when you get on the other side of this, it's good stuff.
Yeah,
But to
I
answer your
loved it when the babies got feisty, and it's like more things that they pull out, that's a good thing. So
yes,
yes, they're in
exactly.
charge.
But
Yeah.
yes, but to answer your question, we can serve better by also recognizing that this is this family's child and that we are the caretaker. And so our job is to guide them, to inform, educate, and guide them and not take it personal when they don't want to do something or they don't agree. We get so, again, that ego is not
Mhm.
about us. It's about the baby in this family. And so, if we really believe that what we're doing is the best thing, then how can we get creative enough to help this family see it? Again, what might they not understand or trust in this moment that I need to address? Right. So, but if you make it about you, you're not going to look for opportunities to build that bridge because they want their baby to get better. They don't want to they don't want them in there. Like no sane parent wants their baby in the NICU, but they're also afraid. And if you don't acknowledge, like, hey, like I had a mom that here in Atlanta, they want to put a PIC line in. So for people who may not be medical, it's like a better IV access, so to speak, like that can stay
Access, yeah.
longer than your peripheral IVs. But she was scared. And, it
Yeah.
was just, they just wanted what they wanted. And she was worried about, like, well, where could it go? What could go wrong? And so we talked about that. I said, hey, so what were you scared about? So I addressed it. Hey, this is how they do it. This is where they go in. And maybe the team explained it and maybe they didn't, or maybe she just needed to hear it 2 times, or maybe she just needed to hear it from someone, who knows. But she then went ahead after we had a talk about it, she went ahead and okayed for it. And I'm sure that they were probably frustrated. I've had moments where I've kind of been like, we do these things so much, but again, I've made it about me. Like, of course, we put in IVs and we do these things all the time. But again, this is this mom's first time seeing her baby
Yes.
get a PIC line. So I think we got off easy maybe on the other times when people maybe didn't question. And so that's the challenge, right? When people don't
Right.
question us, we think the people who do are the problem, but it really wasn't that they're the problem. They just wanted to understand more, and that was their right all along. We just got off easy with the person who didn't ask questions.
And sometimes, you're asking parents to make
Oh,
truly a life or death decision. I remember we had a situation and the neonatologist wanted to do one thing and the surgeon wanted to do something else. And it was huge. I mean, this
yeah.
was the surgery that we put our son in and he had a 2 in 10 chance of surviving. And so he did, by the way. And
Thank
but
God.
but I remember looking at the nurse and I said, "I wanna speak to them individually." And I said, "I'm not trying to be difficult, but this is the biggest decision that I will make as his mom, and I need some time. Like, I know that time is not our friend, but can you just give me 5 minutes? 2.5 minutes with one, 2.5 minutes with another to know that we're gonna make the right decision." And we ended up doing the surgery, and it was the right thing to do, but I think oftentimes we forget that while maybe the decision may be easier because on the NICU professional side, you've done this so many times, you're like, I know what the outcome's going to be. But as a parent, sometimes you're like, but I've never done this before.
Yeah,
I loved, sometimes it
exactly.
just takes us a minute to just process it and then be like, okay,
Yeah,
now I know what we need to do next. But thank you for
yeah.
reminding us of our humanity. That's so good. Um, I have a million more questions for you, but I should probably end it there. So, Dr. Daigle, thank you for reminding us of how to be um, more compassionate, more curious with our patients, and understanding better like where they're coming from, so that then we can serve their babies better. I love what you do outside of the hospital and your practice, and just this general awareness. And when you do that TED Talk, please let me know, because I'll be the first one
I
to like get a
will.
ticket so that I can sit in the audience. But I'm really grateful for your wisdom and your expertise today.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm grateful for you too. And these are just important. And I think everybody who does this work comes from a good place. But like I said at NAN, we're all a combination of our exposure, our education, our experience, and that's even the professionals. And I think only by taking time to acknowledge that can we then address biases, struggles and challenges, and say, how can I show up better today? And I challenge the nurses that too. Like, this is something I actively do every day I go to work. I take time to reflect on what I'm about to do that day, and that I may have come across some challenges, and I may have a difficult parent, like quote, but and when I say that, I mean that in the sense that that's the labels that people tend to use. I don't like that
Right.
label.
I
And
understand
even
what you
you
mean.
saying that you weren't trying to be difficult, I hate that you even felt you had to justify that. Like, you be wanting to understand should be appreciated. We should be applauding the families who want to ask questions and understand what's going on. And so I think if we just commit to why we signed up, hopefully it was for the right reasons to begin with. But if you take just those few minutes and even just meditate on, hey, this is this day I'm about to show up, and whatever it brings, I'm going to commit to being my best self and seeing persons. And the way I do it, and I don't know, everybody has different spiritual beliefs, but I always ask God to let me see people the way He sees them. And so if you do that, I think you recognize that the humanity, you remember the humanity, because you want that same recognition in your times of need and struggle and challenge. So I think it goes both ways. I would, in an ideal world, I want parents to give us grace, and I want us to give them grace too. And I want us to always remember like what's important in it all every day.
I had a nurse remind me one time. I was asking her, I was like, how do you not become so desensitized, to big trauma that other people are going through? And she said, I always remind my nurses and anyone that works in the NICU that that's somebody's hopes and dreams. That baby is somebody's hopes and dreams. And she said, on the
That's
days that
so
I get
good.
frustrated, or the days that, like I've found myself just like going through the motion, she said, I stop and I say, like, that's somebody's hopes and dreams. And she said, it always brings me back to
See,
what it
you
is
got to
that I
have a
need to do.
system. Whatever your system or your strategy is, you have to have one. Otherwise, you
Yeah.
do become desensitized. And I do know it's a thing, like, we're taught in medicine, don't get personal, don't protect yourself. But I think that is actually what has made me a good physician. And I've just learned how to do it. Like, I still cry. I remember I would tell my husband if a baby died or a family died, I would cry. He'd be like, don't cry. They'll think you did something wrong. I'd be like, no, they won't, because I can document whatever I need to document. I'm going to put what happened. But I think it keeps me sane in myself, like that I'm in touch with what's going on. And it's actually my own relief, to be able to
Right.
share in that grief of that moment, because it is impactful. And I think to ignore that is actually more traumatic than the trauma that you're going through.
No, we need our NICU professionals to not forget their humanity, and
Yeah.
instead, I think it can be your superpower in that we serve our
Yep.
parents
I
better.
think
So
I agree.
I agree. Okay. Well, then we should end it on the agree. So, Dr. Daigle, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all, so much for listening. That was a fantastic conversation. I hope that you'll do me a favor. If you love today's episode, please share it with a friend. You can also review over on Apple Podcast or Spotify or wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. You can also give us a listen and a watch over on YouTube. It's how we reach more NICU professionals. Today's podcast episode is sponsored by Reckitt Mead Johnson, whose mission is to nourish the world's children for the best start in life. For more than a century, they have led the way in developing safe, high-quality, innovative nutrition products and continue to push the boundaries of nutritional knowledge with consistent, strong investments in scientific exploration.